Welcome to the Long Road to the Vote Suffrage Centennial Lecture Series. Please remember to like, share, and comment. And now for a little bit about the URI Humanities.
We are facing problems and challenges that do not have easy, simple, finite solutions. Machines are going to be doing so much stuff for us. The only things that are going to be left are the things that only human brains can do. And those kinds of things are taught by arts and humanities.
Studying the humanities, studying literature, drama, art, performance, what that feeds in a student is possibility.
The University of Rhode Island is a really good place to pursue one's interests in an environment of opportunities. That engagement, in some way, shape, or form, becomes in part the definition of the university experience.
Every area of the humanities trains you to investigate, explore. If you want to lead, you have to have a broad, interdisciplinary, open-minded approach to the world.
Exploration is the foundation of everything that we do. You have to be able to think beyond the circumstances you're presently in. The critical thinking, the language skills, reasoning abilities, those are the ways that you can build a bridge between what you did before and what you can do in the future.
The skills students learn in the humanities are skills that they will take into every aspect of their future life, both personal and professional.
The problems that we have facing us are complicated issues that require people who move across disciplines, think creatively, think deeply. That's something that humanities provides. You're getting that methodology and the practice that'll prepare you for your future.
Welcome to the Long Road to the Vote Suffrage Centennial Lecture Series. Tonight's talk by Rhode Island Secretary of State Nellie Gorbea on current trends in voting rights is the fifth and final event in our series this fall. We'd like to thank URI's Center for the Humanities, the Department of Gender and Women's Studies, the College of Arts and Sciences, the Social Science Institute for Research, Education, and Politics and Policy, the Honors Program, and the Women's Leadership Council for sponsoring our series. Please like, comment, and share this event on social media. After tonight's talk, we'll have time for questions and answers, so please type your questions into the chat. And now, I'd like to introduce Dr. Jen Riley, Dean of URI's College of Arts and Sciences, to say a few words.
Thank you, Shauna. Good evening and welcome. The College of Arts and Sciences at URI is very proud to be a co-sponsor of the Long Road to the Vote Suffrage Centennial Lecture Series. Tonight, we have the distinct pleasure of hearing from Rhode Island's own Secretary of State, Nellie Gorbea, who, along with her team and with Elizabeth Francis and the Rhode Island Council for the Humanities, led the initiative in the state for a series of events to take place throughout the year celebrating the 100th anniversary of women's right to vote. I'd like to put that anniversary of suffrage for women in more context for us. For example, it's essential to recognize that women of color were not officially allowed to vote in the United States until the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So our 100th anniversary of suffrage is for only one part of our population. Further, we need to remember that our right to vote rests upon the work of many women, not just the big names of Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. We can't forget Sojourner Truth, for example, a former slave who spoke eloquently at a convention in 1851 in Akron, Ohio. Predating Truth, we find the Black Methodist preacher, Jarena Lee, writing a memoir about sexism in her profession. Maria Stewart of 1820s Boston, voicing deep concern for communities of color in pamphlets and speaking. Mary Church Terrell, who joined with Ida B. Wells Barnett in speaking out against lynching. Mrs. Terrell gave a powerful speech in 1906 to the National Women's Club titled, "What It Means to Be Colored in the Capital of the United States." You should find and read her speech. The work for equality in voting is not, as we all too clearly see today, finished. We must all join together, and I paraphrase Mary Church Terrell here. Lift as we climb, elevating all people to voting eligibility and viability for the sake of our democracy. The fact that this month we witnessed the highest voter turnout in over 100 years, and we also saw a strong youth voter turnout that increased over 5% compared to 2016, speaks to our country's belief in the democratic process and the power that a vote has. Thank you for joining us to hear from Secretary of State Nellie Gorbea about our recent election and trends in voting patterns. I now pass it back to Professor Shauna Person-Mirkowitz.
Thank you, Dr. Riley. Now let me introduce tonight's guest speaker. Secretary Gorbea was elected Secretary of State for Rhode Island in 2014. Her election was a landmark victory as she became the first Hispanic elected to statewide office in New England. Since then, she has rapidly emerged as a national leader. In her role as Secretary of State, she has led the charge to replace aging voting machines, acquire state-of-the-art paper ballot optical scan machines for the entire state. She's improved access to the ballot box by championing and implementing automatic voter registration and online voter registration. And she has ushered in tough legislation to increase government transparency, crack down on violations of lobbying rules, and make Rhode Island's lobbying registration system a model for the nation. I am pleased to introduce our Secretary of State, Nellie Gorbea.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be with all of you here tonight. This discussion, the road to voting is an interestingly and very timely one. And as you may have heard, we've had an election recently. Some of us are still recovering from it. And obviously, this election was unlike any other, both for voters and for election officials. So through it all, I was focused on my core mission as Secretary of State, which is to improve access to the ballot box while maintaining the integrity of every vote. And that's really important because I think at times those two items have been pitted against each other, right? Improving access to the ballot box, it turns out, can be done while maintaining the integrity of every vote. I'm very proud that this year, despite all of the challenges of the pandemic and misinformation campaigns, we delivered a safe and secure election for Rhode Islanders and shattered turnout records along the way, as the Dean just mentioned. We had over 507,000 Rhode Islanders cast a ballot this year, and the previous record was 475,000 set in the 2008 general election. Those 500,000 votes were almost evenly split among 3 safe and secure voting options that we established: voting from home with a mail ballot, voting early in person, and voting at the polls on Election Day. As an advocate for early in-person voting since I became Secretary of State in 2015, I can't tell you how good it felt to not only see early in-person voting become a law in Rhode Island this year, but for 150,000 people also to take advantage of it. And I can't say enough about the time and effort that went into this election by folks from my office, the Board of Elections, and local boards of canvassers. All the time that poll workers dedicated to making sure that we had elections running at the local polling places. It was all really, really inspiring to see, and much needed light in the darkness that has been a lot of 2020. So the topic tonight of, commemorating the 19th Amendment, as a woman, I got to oversee this historic election during the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, which granted women the right to vote. Now, the Rhode Island General Assembly ratified the 19th Amendment sort of in the middle of the pack of all the states on January 6th, 1920. The actual text of the 19th Amendment says, "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex." Sounds like a really good idea. And like any really good idea, of course, it took decades of hard work and determination to make the 19th Amendment a reality. And we should absolutely honor the persistence and courage of the suffrage movement. But the centennial should be more than just a celebration. I want us to take the lessons of the women's suffrage movement, the good and the bad, and use them to move Rhode Island towards a brighter future. We need to recognize, as also the Dean mentioned, that the 19th Amendment did not guarantee all women the right to vote. It guaranteed white women the right to vote. But people of all races and backgrounds worked to make its passage possible. Black, Latinx, Asian Americans, and others had to wait until the Voting Rights Act of 1965. That's nearly 40 years later to benefit from the 19th Amendment. Countless women of color saw their work in advocacy go unsung in history books and in telling of that story of the passage of the 19th Amendment. Women like Bertha Higgins, who lived in Providence for the last 40 years of her life. And she got involved in community organizations like the Women's Suffrage Party of Rhode Island. She wrote letters to elected officials. She helped raise money for the suffrage effort by staging variety shows. And she was one of the founding members of the Rhode Island League of Women Voters. After those decades of work, Bertha Higgins' daughter also became the first Black social worker at the Rhode Island Department of Public Welfare. Now, just this year, we have elected our first female Black and Asian American vice president. This election and the anniversary of the suffrage movement are landmark examples of how our democracy is always evolving. And it's definitely not a straight line. It's sort of zigzagging, sort of with a forward direction. And the democracy should always be evolving. Many of the structures that were put in place generations ago don't make sense today. We've come a long ways in the 100 years since the 19th Amendment was passed, but there's still a lot of work to be done when it comes to access to the ballot box. Now, the good news is that each of us has the power to shape our communities through our voices, our votes, and our actions. That's the beauty of living in our democracy. Our best public policy decisions come when we have a variety of opinions, perspectives, and backgrounds at the policymaking table. So, as a shout out to you, students, I'll say it's absolutely vital that you add your voices to that conversation. And some of you have been doing that, but you have to continue to do so by continuing to vote and being involved in your community. It's that spirit of inclusivity and diversity that my office it was with that spirit of inclusivity and diversity that my office launched this collaboration with the Rhode Island Council for the Humanities for this celebration or commemoration this year called Shall Not Be Denied. And so through the year, we've been amplifying virtual events and programs to commemorate this 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment. We also have some incredible resources for educators and parents on our website, sos.ri.gov, as well as historic suffrage documents from the state archives. And so I really want to encourage all of you to go online later on and check them out. Let us know if there's more that you want too, because we're there to serve your research needs at the state archives. Now, this centennial has been an incredible opportunity to talk to Rhode Islanders about the complex history of the women's suffrage movement and to increase civic literacy and engagement throughout the state. One of the most valuable lessons younger Rhode Islanders can learn from the women's suffrage movement is the power of consistently making your voice heard. Now, I found this anecdote in Jane Newton Small's book, The Broad Influence, and that's broad, B-R-O-A-D, influence, where she uses the theory of critical mass to illustrate why entire institutions don't necessarily change until the industry or institution consists of somewhere between 20 and 30% women. So she talks about, like in the United States Senate, that number was 20%. When 20% of the Senate consisted of women, the Pentagon had to reform the US military's sexual assault protocols. For Hollywood, it was 25% of producers being women before Harvey Weinstein and others were finally held accountable. And then when the White House press corps reached 30% threshold, even news media began to address the sexism that occurs in their own offices, from the very top in the executive offices right down to the news desks. And many studies have shown that diversity in gender and ethnicity are what's really required to be present in order for a company to really be successful. In this research, Ms. Newton-Small noted that corporate boards that reach critical mass are more efficient, make more money, and have to restate earnings less frequently. Now, we're getting closer and closer to reaching that critical mass in public discourse and in state government. In the US, we've crossed 25% with 1,866 women serving in state legislatures. This was before this election. We'll have a new count as of this election. But in Rhode Island, as of this election, more women and people of color were elected to office than ever before. So our state Senate will be 50% female for the first time ever. And we can absolutely put the little clapping hands on the screens for all of those of you on Facebook. We also have not only elected more women in the Senate, we've elected more women than ever before to our House of Representatives. And so 27 out of our 75 reps are going to be women. We still have a ways to go. So for those of you interested in still running. And now in terms of people of color, we have 33 Latinx elected officials throughout our states, more than half of whom are women. And so we're seeing that the numbers rise, as well as with elected officials from Black and other communities. Simply put, this year we saw the power of an electorate that is engaged, both in the continued positive momentum of diversity in our government and in the record turnout that I mentioned earlier. Yes, the tense political environment right now did play a role in motivating people to vote. But we've had plenty of other periods in our history where people have been up in arms about what's going on in Washington or in their capitals. What made the difference this cycle is that we evolved our elections to make it easier for people to vote. We adapted our democracy, and that meant people could vote while still taking care of their health. That evolution of our voting systems didn't just happen. It didn't just happen because of the pandemic, although the pandemic really did help sort of move some features of it along. In Rhode Island, it took us years of upgrading our infrastructure with hardware like new voting machines and electronic poll books, and modernizing election laws to meet the challenges of contemporary life. You know, this year we fought all the way to the US Supreme Court so that Rhode Islanders didn't have to risk their health to vote from home during the pandemic. And it also took years of collaborative work between my office, the State Board of Elections, and local cities and towns to make Rhode Island a leader for elections administration. Most importantly, this year, these improvements meant that Rhode Islanders had several options for voting safely and securely. And it all added up to that record-shattering turnout. That's what can happen when our democracy keeps evolving to truly represent the people. I've always been, as I think about voting rights, one of the things that I'm struck by is that while in our country we've done a lot to move towards universal suffrage, we still, until this year, had a ways to go in really making the right to vote truly universally available through our election systems, and honestly, still through our structures of government. But we've made some progress. And I'm really proud to have been part of that this year. And I hope that each of you will be a change for continuing that change going forward. Get involved. I know that on COVID, a lot of things are on hold, but it won't last forever. Thankfully, it looks like there's a few vaccines in our future. So, once this is all sorted out, jump in, coach a sports team, join a community group, serve on a board or commission. They're great training grounds for the possibility of running for office, which I also encourage you to consider. Our democracy will be stronger with your voice in the mix. I really want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here. And I can't tell you how honored I am to have been your Secretary of State during this remarkable time period. And with that, I think let's open it up to some questions, because that always makes it more interesting. Shauna, you're muted. So start all over again.
I am starting all over. Sorry about that, everyone. Thank you, Secretary Gorbea. You have been an amazing leader for voting rights and certainly a partner for all of us who try to increase civic engagement among our students, many of whom in the audience today volunteered as poll workers this year. So I think you would be proud of our URI students who did that. I think we just heard why you're a rising national star, and I wonder if Rhode Island will be able to keep you here. We'll now take some questions for you. So please, audience, remember you can type questions in the chat. And the first question is going to be a pre-recorded video question.
Hello, Secretary Gorbea. Thank you for taking the time to do this lecture at our university, and I hope that you and your family currently find yourselves well. My name is Giselle. I am a junior at the university, and I am a Mandarin, economics, and political science triple major. My question for you is, what are your thoughts on the current ongoing wild goose chase in the country surrounding mail-in ballots and voter fraud? Thank you for your time, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you for your question, Giselle. Wow, I'm amazed that you were able to do that video given all of that work. Triple major, gee, I feel like an underachiever. So, you know, what can I tell you? For those of us who worked in this election, and I can tell you, like from both parties in many occasions, or many people who are independents, the focus on finding some sort of wrong thing that happened in this election cycle is a complete wild goose chase. This is the most secure and accurate election that we've had in the country's history, in part because elections are open processes, open meetings. So you have thousands of people in Rhode Island alone, right, handling this election. The thought that you could somehow rig the system in a systematic way, in an overwhelming way, so that you could actually get different results than what people want is really just not feasible. And so, you know, I want to just reassure everybody and point you to a page that's called Rumor Control over at the CISA.com, CISA.gov. That's the Cybersecurity Information Security Agency. And they've set up a page of rumor control, and among them are many of the answers to things like, you know, these allegations that are completely unsubstantiated.
Thank you so much. I think we have a question from the chat next. What trend surprised you the most with voting trends since you've been in office?
What trends? I wouldn't say that it surprised me, but it's been fantastic to be a part of seeing more and more young people turning out to vote and participating in our elections. And because a lot of those young people are also more diverse in their backgrounds. If you look at the demographics, the diversity is absolutely there. So as somebody who really wants to get as many voices into the room as possible, seeing that has been great. Now, it didn't, again, just happen. I mean, when I first got elected, I put together a council of younger folks. I am not so young anymore. And I had no idea, you know, what approaches might really meet the needs of younger voters. And so they came up with a couple of things. One was a very cool website called URI Votes. And it's also the name of our Instagram account, our Insta account, as my kids would say. And it has some of the funniest memes on registering to vote and voting. I encourage anybody who wants to still submit. We will still take them. They have to be nonpartisan and clean, of course. But we were able to reach young people, hopefully where you all are. We did animated videos that explain very simply, you know, how it is that you could vote from home or vote in person or vote early. I think that the reasons people don't vote are much more complicated than they just don't think that their vote matters. We have historically not made it easier for people. And I think this pandemic, these elections during the pandemic are proof of that, right? In the middle of a pandemic, we had record turnout. Why did that happen? Because we made it easier for people to vote, and to vote from where they felt comfortable, given their health considerations, that they needed to be to vote. So that's what I would say.
Wonderful. The next video we have is from a student who recorded a video for you.
Hello, my name is Kirsten, and I'm a junior political science and sociology major at the University of Rhode Island. Since the most recent election, do you know what percentage of registered voters turned out to vote in Rhode Island? And how do you plan on increasing this in future elections to ensure that the most vulnerable are able to show up at the polls?
So we have, I should have had this number already, actually, right? So it's more than, so it has to be more than, yes, it's around 60%, given the turnout. But we did have, because we did also had an increase in voter registration. So we have an increase in the numerator and then the denominator. So, in some ways it matches the national turnout numbers historically, like presidential election years tend to be around 60-something%. The off years, which are, statewide elected officials, in our case, the executive branch of Rhode Island state government, which will be in 2 more years, usually it drops down to 40%. And I attribute that to just the fact that media attention is just much less. It's one thing when you see the election being discussed in every single platform, versus not everybody, CNN and MSNBC, Fox, and others are not focusing on the Rhode Island state executive branch elections on the off years. But that kind of turnout is really encouraging, particularly with young voters, because there is research showing that once a young person votes, they become a voter for life. When you do it later on, or you haven't done it, nobody likes to feel stupid, right? Doing something new, and especially in front of a group of people. So if you think about, if you've never gone to vote, you've never seen what it's like, that in and of itself is going to hold you back. So if you do it when you're young, then you get over it, and then you just figure it out. Now, our democracy is complicated, so you're going to have to figure it out every single time you go up. And luckily, in Rhode Island, at least, we've made it so that elections are not pop quizzes. You can look at your ballot ahead of time if you're just going to go vote in person. So keep that in mind as you go forward. If you move from, one city or town to another, you're going to change the bottom third of your ballot. So engaging in democracy as a voter is not a spectator sport. You've got to get in there, participate. You've got to learn, as you go forward in life. And I hope that you will all do that.
Wonderful. Thank you. The next question is from the chat, and I do want to encourage everyone to please post your questions, comments in the chat. The next question is, what advice do you have for women who might be interested in seeking office for the first time?
So my first advice is to just do it. I know it seems like there should be a guidebook or some sort of playbook. There's a myth to that. And part of the reason there's a myth is because historically it's been guys, and guys have a certain way that their lives run. Women, it's a little bit more complicated. So in my case, my first run for elected office was a statewide elected official, which sounds kind of crazy when you think about it, right? Because the mode is you're supposed to go into local office or state legislature, and then you might consider a big jump. In my case, I had been an appointee of this office. I had been a deputy secretary of state for 4 years, and I ran it. So when I fast forwarded, 10 years later, I thought, I actually know that office really, really well. And this is another thing about women candidates. They tend to be over-prepared for the offices that they run because they are not secure about themselves. And this is not just me saying it. There's a lot of studies that say that women need to be asked multiple times. I think Emily's List did a study where it said like 7 times is the average that women need to be asked. And the guys, and again, I'm hoping that I'm speaking out of my generation and that all of you younger folks, this is not going to be true when the studies are done. For my generation, the guys just got up and did it, or, and also because the structures are there. Women historically, again, my generation have historically been caregivers for children. And so you worry about, okay, what's going to happen when I run for office? How am I going to manage, what the kids are doing? And so, or how am I going to manage my job? And that's where I say that some of our structures of government are not conducive to parity. That if you're a caretaker and suddenly you're faced with, running for state legislature, well, the legislature meets Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays from 3:30 in the afternoon to, we don't really know what time at night. Sometimes it's early, sometimes it's 11 o'clock at night. Who has that kind of flexibility, both in their work life and personal life, to be able to do this? Historically, it's been men, and it's been men of certain means. And so that, has restricted who tends to run. So my advice for women is to go ahead and just do it. There isn't one playbook. Now, if you're not ready yet, or you want to, think about it a little bit more, you can do what I did, which is you serve on a lot of boards and commissions. I served on a lot of nonprofit boards. They introduced me to people, to topics that I wasn't familiar with. And then you kind of learn the ropes of sort of managing meetings and public meetings. And so it becomes a little bit less scary. So those are ways, or you become a political appointee like I did, and then you run. The biggest thing is to figure out that there's never going to be a perfect time. And what you need is a strong support base around you, your friends, your family, and you go with that. Another way is that you can also contribute to the running of a campaign, volunteer in a campaign, so you can see some of that up close. But there's no one way, just do it.
Wonderful. And next we have a question from the videos.
Hi, my name is Hannah. I'm a junior at URI and I'm majoring in political science and criminal justice. The 19th Amendment expanded the electorate to include the voices of women. Today, every American over the age of 18 is entitled to participate in our elections. However, despite constitutional protections, there still exist barriers that prevent all Americans from voting. This year, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a record number of absentee ballots casted. Not only does absentee voting protect those at risk for COVID, but allows other Americans otherwise unable to vote in person the opportunity to cast their ballot. For individuals who can't step away from work, childcare, or are college students like me and live out of state, absentee voting is the only opportunity to participate in elections. Do you believe widespread use of absentee voting could increase political participation and representation? Could it be a tool to overcome disproportionate wait times at polling locations and effectively combat voter suppression? If so, how are you in the state of Rhode Island going to employ and protect the use of absentee ballots in future elections?
Well, thank you for that question. Yes, yes, and yes. And I think our November 3rd election proved that, right? So whoever went to vote on November 3rd, what was interesting, so the 507,000 voters were almost evenly split into thirds among the different ways of voting. About 39% I voted from home, another 30-something% voted early in person, and then the last 30% voted on election day. And so consequently, yes, election day, there were not the kind of lines that people might have expected, given how contentious the election was. But voting from home has always existed in Rhode Island, for example, and it's just that not many people knew about it. And I started publicizing this as an option, but we still had some barriers to it. The oath envelope, where you put your ballot and mail it in, required that your signature be witnessed by either two people, two other registered voters, or be signed in front of a notary public. That's a barrier to using mail ballots. And for the pandemic, it was downright dangerous. So we convinced we couldn't convince the General Assembly to pass this as a law. We tried to do it under executive order, and then we were sued because we were trying to implement this. Actually, we were trying to implement an agreement with certain parties who sued me because it was happening during a pandemic. And so we ended up winning all the way to the Supreme Court. I think that that's a change that absolutely has to be made. in going forward. And so it's going to be one of the legislation that I'm going to propose next cycle to get rid of that signature requirement, which really doesn't do anything for protecting the integrity of the election, because what matters in the end to make sure that that is a valid voter is that the signature of the voter, no matter whether it's witnessed or not, the signature of the voter is what's compared to with the original signature that the voter put on their voter registration card or when they signed up to vote at the DMV. So those are changes that absolutely we can continue and make it easier for people to vote. The barriers have historically been there. People didn't know about it, and then you had these little kind of quirky requirements. When you took them away, like, hundreds of thousands of people took advantage and voted from home. And I think from what I hear from voters, it's something that voters will want to continue to do.
Thank you. Our chat is really lively at the moment. There's a lot of questions coming in, and I hope everyone continues to contribute. One question: what is your opinion on allowing those currently in prison to vote?
So Rhode Island, I'm proud to say, is much more progressive than many other states, and does afford those who have been in prison the opportunity to vote, and they're automatically registered once they come out of prison. But the incarcerated are not. And that's a challenging conversation, I think, and one that we should definitely look into. But we have been doing a lot of work, one in doing both civics education for people who are incarcerated, to letting them know of what their rights are when they come out, and making sure that they realize that they're going to be automatically registered to what was then their former address, trying to make sure that we have a correct address from them. And we have dedicated people we have very dedicated people at the Department of Corrections that are trying to make sure that the formerly incarcerated do have the right to vote restored, and that they know about it as well and are able to exercise it.
Wonderful. Thank you. The next question, I believe, is from the chat as well. Olivia asks, since there's such a push to get more Rhode Islanders to vote regardless of method, do you see Rhode Island enacting same-day voter registration in the near future?
I would hope so. I think that's one tool that has been proven to really increase voter turnout, more so actually than early in-person voting, or even, mail ballots definitely help increase voter turnout. I mean, if you look at the states that have the highest voter turnout, Oregon, Washington State, now Colorado, all have 80% voter turnouts, and they are completely mail ballot states. So that's one way to go. The other one would be to have same-day voter registration. Rhode Island has this really terrible situation where in our Constitution, it's required that there be a 30-day blackout time period to registering to vote. And so I focused on a lot of other things just because we could get them done before we can tackle now. But I think we have to tackle the state constitution next because that 30-day blackout period is really wrong. Most people aren't even aware that there's an election happening 30 days before. They come into realizing about it much closer to. And again, some of these laws were done when we didn't have the technology of databases and electronic poll books. And it's time to rethink them in light of the technology that we do have and that we're using as part of election administration.
Wonderful, thank you. Our next question is from Cece Sidley.
Hi, my name is Cece, and I'm a sophomore political science student at the University of Rhode Island. Voter suppression is not a new issue. There are many different methods that have been used for many years to make it more difficult for Americans to vote. One step that the Rhode Island government has taken to decrease hurdles to voting is the implementation of automatic voter registration. Do you think that this is a policy that should be implemented nationwide? And is there any other legislation that you would like to see passed before the next election to increase the voting rights of Rhode Islanders?
Thank you, Cece. That's great. As it turns out, Rhode Island was the 9th state to pass automated voter registration. And since then, it's really been taken on. I think there's probably around more than 30 states that already have that. So I'm encouraged by that. Because if you think about it, government should be serving people. So if people are at the DMV and you already know that they're a citizen and you know that where they live, why do you have to, and you know, actually for driver's licenses purposes, you know whether the person's a citizen or not, then why make them jump through an additional hoop of asking them, do you want to register to vote? So what automated voter registration does is it says, we realize you are eligible to be registered to vote. We're going to register you unless you tell us, no, you don't want to. And that simple change in how we formulate the question, and yay for humanities majors who help us think about how we construct language, that and informs that simple change really leads to, number one, more people registering, and number two, more accurate information on our voter rolls. Because a lot of times when people would face the question at the DMV of, would you like to register to vote? They would say no, because I'm already registered, but they didn't realize that if they were changing addresses, then that change wasn't coming through. And now we're getting the changes of addresses, which helps us keep a much more accurate voter list. So that was, automated voter registration has absolutely been fantastic. Now, I would love to see it continue into other government agencies, like, you know, the social benefits, unemployment, all of those other government agencies. That to me is the next big push that needs to happen to make sure that the people who are in those government agencies that are accessing government services there can also register to vote or register their change of address. That will be hugely helpful. And then in terms of what I would like to do in the next legislative session, so definitely getting rid of, like I said, the requirement on mail ballots. I think we should really be thinking about why can't we just say, I want to receive mail ballots from here on, and to be able to do that on the website. Some of these very common sense things, interestingly enough, even though we have the technology to do them, I can't do because there isn't a law authorizing that to be done. And so one of the challenges and joys of public service is that a lot of times you don't have the power to do the things you'd like to do. Rather, you need to convince others to do that. And again, yay for humanities. It gives you some of the trainings with which to do that.
Wonderful. Next, we have a question from Lainey Cooperman. She says, thank you for your lecture tonight. My question is, how concerned are you with the future of democracy due to the current political atmosphere, and what can we citizens do to protect our right to vote?
So I'd be lying if I didn't tell you that prior to November 3rd, I was really, really, really worried. After November 3rd, I'm a little bit less worried. And part of what gives me hope is that the system worked, that we really don't have, we didn't have major malfunctions. We didn't have huge attacks by foreign actors that were successful. And yes, it is true that there's a huge part of our country that sees the world very differently than the other. But under the right leadership, we can come together again as a nation. And what I hope the next several years will point is that leadership matters. When you have a person in the White House, with the bully pulpit that is the White House, constantly dividing people, that really damages our faith in our democracy. And so, for me, it was actually a lesson learned. I used to tell people that, local, and state offices, because they're usually ignored, are hugely, hugely important. And the last 4 years have reminded me that all elected offices are really important. So I'm not, I'm cautiously optimistic. But then again, I'm an elected official, so I could not be in this job if I couldn't be cautiously optimistic that we will be able to turn the corner. The other thing is that all of you young people got involved, and that is great. That really is something that nurtures our democracy, that you were all involved. Beyond the marching, you served as, as Professor Pearson said, as poll workers, or you worked for candidates, or you texted for, candidates. And all of that is a really great shot of energy into our democracy.
The next question comes from Jake in the chat. Looking towards the future of voting, what are some new innovative ways that we may be able to use to identify voters more easily and accurately in elections? And thank you for your work in Rhode Island.
So I want to say that the targeting of voters is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, I want voters, I want to be able to contact voters, for example, from the Department of State and from their election offices to make sure that they know of changes to their voter record, or changes of address, for example, or when a polling place has changed, and to do so by email or by text. But right now, under the law, those fields are actually public records. And so what happens is you have companies buying these fields. And so I do think that there's a very interesting conversation that needs to happen in our country about what data should be public and what shouldn't, and whether the targeting by third-party groups, and I say this knowing that many of them are very well-intentioned, it shouldn't somehow be rethought. Because having a third-party group tell people where to go vote opens the possibility for a nefarious actor to do the same. And so how can we upgrade the systems of government so that government does that really, really well, and that we don't rely on third-party groups to do that, is, I think, where we should be moving with regards to election administration.
The next question's from a video from Max.
Good evening, Secretary Gorbea, and thank you very much for joining us tonight. My question to you is, given the rise in voter suppression, especially in the South and the Midwest, do you think the federal government should be more involved in securing free and fair elections for all of our citizens?
So I think that the biggest step forward that we need to have in terms of the federal government in order to combat voter suppression is to restore some of the provisions of the Voting Rights Act. That some of the legal court cases that we've lost at the Supreme Court level have been really damaging to voter rights throughout the country. And so to me, that's the area where change needs to happen, is to once we're able to get the consensus in Congress to restore the Voting Rights Act to its full powers.
Wonderful. The next question comes from Thomas McGrath. Do you anticipate a decrease in voting in the 2022 midterms and the 2024 election?
So naturally, there usually is, unfortunately, although I'm hoping to somehow counteract it a little bit. I'm hoping that it's not going to be as huge a drop-off as it maybe has been in the past. And I'm hoping because with early in-person voting and mail ballots being a much more accessible tools, that does give people an ability to vote beyond the one day, 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. So there'll probably be a little bit more of a drop-off than I would like, but I'm hoping to counteract it with accessibility to the ballot box.
Wonderful. We have another question from Chloe. How do you think our country is going to heal from the damage done the past 4 years? Do you believe we are too divided and fractured to come back?
So on the last question, no, it's never too late. It's never too late to engage with others, even people who you disagree with. But that's going to entail each and every one of us having conversations with people who are different than us and trying to find that common ground. I carry my work as an elected official knowing that I'm always going to be dealing with people who I don't necessarily fully agree with. but I'm going to listen to them. One, to figure out if there's a way in which I can explain it differently that maybe they just are not getting. And in the case where they can't, figuring out where there might be a point of consensus. And so I'm hopeful that we can find those spaces again in order to bring back a little bit, some of this healing process that needs to happen over the next 4 years. And I would encourage you, in your time as students, to look for people, for conversations in which you don't necessarily agree, and that it's okay. It's okay to think differently. If we could all convince each other that we're all right, then we'd all go off the cliff like lemmings, right? So there's actually a societal advantage to not everybody thinking the same way. But there has been a lot of damage done to being so on each other's cases about disagreements that we find ourselves in this really sad place. So for me, it's easier to say that because I've seen other time periods. I'm hoping that the next time period that you all are going to live through will find more common spaces to have conversations where you can find commonality of purpose and things that unite us going forward. This is a country that in many ways, defeats many odds because it was started by a disparate group of many different people, coming in and taking over, land that was somebody else's. And so it was not one tribe forming one country. So it was only through the structures of government and debate and decision-making that we've evolved over time, that we've been able to stay together as a country. And I'm hoping that with some changes and greater participation by a variety of voices, we can find that north of being truly united again.
Thank you so much, Secretary Gorbea. We have one final question for you. If you could just tell students if they have time to just do one thing to make the country a better place, what would you tell them they should do?
Listen civilly and carefully to those you disagree with. There's always something to be learned. I actually really, in many ways, enjoy talking with people who I disagree with. It really helps you think about your own perspectives, and none of us have the truth in its absolute. So that would be the one thing I would recommend is listen with care and with humanity, to use the word in a different context, in mind, to those that you might not necessarily see eye to eye with, but and that is hard work. But I know that your generation is up for the task.
Secretary Gorbea, I cannot thank you enough for lending your time tonight to our students, to our viewers. You've been such a wonderful, wonderful speaker. And I want to thank all of our audience for commenting and sharing. And I want to encourage you all to comment, like, share on social media. And also to stay tuned. We have more Suffrage Centennial Lecture Series events coming up that are going to be announced for the spring. We will have more people who, I don't know if they'll be as wonderful as Secretary Gorbea, but hopefully they will be. But she has been so fantastic tonight. I hope we all give her a virtual round of applause. Put those handshakes up on our social media, Facebook pages and everything. We cannot thank you enough. And with that, I turn it back over to Dean Riley.
Thank you, Shauna. And thank you, Secretary Gorbea, for this conversation. You focused so well on the importance of voting, of the need for disagreement and civil debate, of listening with care, really of the need for all of us to engage in our democratic processes. Like you, I hope we can all find common ground to unite us, to work together, and to move our country forward. Programs like this happen because of the people out there who support us, URI alumni, Rhode Island people across the country. Please consider supporting URI's Center for the Humanities with a gift. And I want to thank you again for joining us tonight for this event. Have a great evening.